G'day everyone and welcome to Connect Ed. It's awesome to be connected with you. There's been an amazing week planned with Connect Ed around wellbeing, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, inclusive practice, and all supercharged by inspiring teaching and learning. So I get a lot from it. So thank you, so much for the inspiration that that you provide. My name's Mark Sparvel. I'm coming to you live, from Kirkland, Washington State here in the USA, where I'm a global education leader with Microsoft. If we're not acquainted as yet, just, hit me up on Twitter. The link is down below, where I'm always sharing information about the best and the next practice connected to education. So you might have picked up there's a little bit of an accent. I'm Australian. You can see on the map below here roughly how Australia, a little bit of a wonky map, roughly how Australia fits in with Canada and then against the US. In Australia's landmass is about the same size as the United States, but whereas Australia has 26 million people, the US has 320 million, and I think Canada is around about 39 million people. In Australia, fast fact, we have at least one kangaroo for every person, somewhere between 15 million and 50 million, depending upon who you ask. Of course, have to do service to all of the theories around how dangerous Australia is. No worries, Australian Tourism Commission, my pleasure. Drop bears, crocodiles, sharks, spiders, snakes, white pointers. That strange bird that you can see in the top of the screen is a rhea with big claws. It'll cut you open, and of course Russell Crowe, although fair to say he does share citizenship with a couple of other countries, so it's not technically an Australian. What I'm going to talk about is the now, the near, and the next. I am going to touch on the new future-ready skills, but it felt that it was useful and important to situate that in sort of the current context of education reimagined. So consider this to be an invitation and also an introduction. An invitation to follow up with me, an introduction to some of the work that Microsoft Education is leading around the thinking of education reimagined. Again, Twitter is on the screen there, and also a community that I started that's now partnered with Committee for Children. It's Salzburg Global Seminars Preferred Community for Karanga, a global collective on social and emotional learning. It's open to anyone. So if you're interested in social, emotional learning, bit.ly, Selin Edu is the place to go. So, I was having a bit of a think about my best teaching practice moments to share quickly with you, to ground this talk in my kind of background as a teacher and as a school leader. And I've selected out these three kind of images that sort of taught me something. The first one in the top left corner is in remote Mataranka. I guess you would consider that the outback. It's about, I think, 400 or 600 kilometres south from Darwin, Australia's northernmost city. Here I am with a group of students at Mataranka Primary School. The students are teaching other students all around Australia via a webinar about the march of the insidious cane toad across northern Australia, a hideous beast that, squirts poison from its back. And the students are sharing and showing, alarmingly, this toad to others. And what this taught me was that students are experts, and students can and should teach other students. And I guess when I looked at these images, the thing that struck me is they're all remote learning. Cast your eyes underneath Mataranka, where I'm looking like I'm on a cell phone. The question was, is it better not to see a dolphin in the wild than it is to be guaranteed to see one in a marine park? So this was part of a large study in values and ethics. Again, what you can't see is hundreds of students from across Australia connected to a webinar. Now they're listening to a hydrophone, which is being trawled beneath the surface of the water. The water is between Yankalilla and Kangaroo Island. Sounds very Australian, right? We're listening for the chatter of bottlenose dolphins as they're communicating with one another. And on the webinar are cetacean experts in marine mammals, answering the students' questions, which tended to be mostly around how dolphins reproduce, do they have external genitals, and how do they go to the toilet. In the top right-hand corner, Surfs Up had the great honour and privilege to be a teacher and part of the leadership team of Victor Harbourata 7 School, a school on the Fleurieu Peninsula in South Australia that taught surfing and other cool aquatic stuff, was deeply committed to environmental sustainability, and all of the students had an opportunity to learn how to surf, even clumsy, poorly coordinated adults like myself. But what this taught me was that that some things are best experienced in real life, and that when we have the right mix between challenge and support, we're able to take that leap of faith to have that faith in our own ability to be able to not just cope and overcome, but to succeed and flourish, to develop that sense of self-efficacy. So that's kind of like, the beginner's mindset, that preparedness to be the learner and to be uncertain. I think in all three of these, there are stories and insights which are just as relevant now as they were when the photos were taken. Welcome to Education Reimagined. Now, let's go back a step. This pandemic, coronavirus, has shown us how connected we are globally. Things spread fast and they spread at scale. Whether it's misinformation, whether it's fear, or whether it's, an infectious disease. And, these challenges that are presented are, when we're connected, become shared challenges, right? So our challenges are shared challenges, but fortunately, the solutions to the challenges are also shared, because as a profession, as educators, we're just simply better together, particularly, when we're connected. So what's happened? Since mid-April, 191 governments have closed physical schooling in response to the coronavirus. It's roughly between 1.6 and 1.7 billion students worldwide. If you like, 72% of the world's students moved into some form of reactive response remote learning. Now, there's huge disparity both between countries and within countries. We're very aware of that. And there are some groups who are impacted significantly more than others. If we take refugees, migrants, people with poor access to health services, poor sanitisation, those who simply cannot afford not to work or go to work. So there's great variability in the experience that learners have had globally. And there's a massive risk for at-risk youth just not returning to school when you consider, that children make up half of the world's 22.5 million refugees. Probably, my comment here would be, this is both a humanitarian and an economic crisis and a health crisis, with education situated, if you like, right in the middle. And obviously we know this is creating tensions and a looming existing inequities. We know that there's this tension between that this event on one hand might provide a forcing function for much needed education reform, but on the other hand, what it might do is significantly widen existing equity gaps. So there's a little bit of an eye chart, and sorry, my picture-in-picture is probably annoyingly covering up things here. I was in Struggletown, where to put it, so I'll move my head across, see whether that works. The OECD Pisa study looked at 48 countries in the OECD, and it's a study of, hundreds of thousands of educators, schools across the globe. And, when we think about that disparity of experience, that different experience across the globe, these are some interesting stats. Access just to have a quiet place to study is not universal across the globe. And these are organised in descending order from left to right. So if you're in the Netherlands, there's a really good chance, particularly if you are from an advantaged school or even a disadvantaged school in the Netherlands, that you would have access to a quiet place to study. About the centre is the OECD average, and to the right of that, you notice that a significant gap starts to appear between the advantaged and the disadvantaged in terms of, do I have a quiet place to study full stop at home? The next one is, do I have access to a computer for schoolwork across the globe? The grey bar, by the way, is the average between the advantaged and the disadvantaged within that particular country. And if you like, it shows between the little red diamond, advantaged schools, and the yellow triangle, disadvantaged schools, the widening equity gap, just around, do I have access to a computer? And this one was a part of a survey question on teacher readiness, and it was the perception of the school leadership team around both the technical and also the pedagogical skills required to really drive deeper learning or quality learning in online environments. And again, we can see from the far left over to the far right, quite a remarkable spread this time between the advantaged and the disadvantaged schools around teacher efficacy, around the belief that teachers have that they have the necessary skills and abilities to make a difference. And we know from John Hattie's meta-analysis that collective teacher efficacy is a significant contributor to student success. Do the teachers believe that they have the skills and abilities to make a difference? So let's just move my beautiful picture over here. Play follow the mark across the screen. Be funny if this recording didn't work. Again, here we have great difference around who is opening up quickly and who is not open yet, returning back to physical school in some form, and it's varying wildly across the globe again. So there is no one size fits all, but certainly we can learn from the experience of others. You can see right on the far left, schools that were very quick to open: Japan, China, Wuhan, within China included, Denmark, Norway, through to those who will probably be the last to reopen their physical schools. I was talking to a teacher friend of mine in Queensland, Australia. In his school, Mark Modra in Queensland, they had 5 weeks of remote learning, and they've been back to physical school for 5 weeks. Another friend of mine, Clayton, is a principal, and they've reopened their physical school, but just for the little kids. And then for the older kids, it's still remote learning. So he feels like they're almost running 2 schools side by side at the moment, presenting both opportunity and challenge. So when we think about reopening, what we're seeing across the globe is a range of different experiences. Just as a quick snapshot, Wuhan, May 6th, high school students are busy studying behind plastic partitions. In Taiwan, April 29th, students are eating lunch. They're separated behind shields. In Edinburgh, Scotland, children of essential workers are sitting by themselves in lunchrooms, eating their lunch alone. In Paris, a kindergarten child adjusts their mask, has their temperature checked at the door, applies hand sanitizer, and starts kindergarten. In Venezuela, parents gather at the local library and copy in pen and paper the work for their students for the week to take home to their students, because connectivity is still emerging there. So, when people talk about the new normal, it seems to me against that backdrop, that's anything but normal. The only thing and the only place where I find normal is on my washing machine when I'm picking that cycle. So it leads us to this question around what might the future of learning look like, and how might we strategically draw from the successes and the insights to create new, maybe more adaptable models. And these that we know from across the globe, must be anchored in equity, in health and safety, in well-being, and in quality learning. These seem to be the key kind of tenets, if you like. So we partnered with New Pedagogies for Deep Learning and produced a paper 3 weeks ago, June 20th, June 2020 it was released. It's over to the left, right. Education Reimagined, the Future of Learning, which explores this shift from remote to hybrid learning. We're going to dig into that in just a moment. The links to all of the papers are along the bottom. Interestingly, just below my beautiful picture-in-picture, it builds upon 2 previous pieces of work that you might be interested in accessing and sharing with your networks, published by authored by McKinsey and Company and the Economist Intelligence Unit. In the class of 2030, thousands and thousands of students from across the globe were asked about learning and skills. And they identified consistently that social and emotional skills like relationship skills, self-regulation were critical for their success. In fact, they consistently placed them in their top list of skills. The students also clearly said that they did not want their learning to be automated by machines, but they did all believe that with greater autonomy, they could achieve so much more. In a sense, the students were saying that they wanted their learning to be not automated, but they wanted to have autonomy. And they wanted to have teachers who knew them and how they learn, knew their curriculum and how they teach, to provide them with the skills that they needed, the guided release for the learners to become more autonomous. What was interesting in the class of 2030, and it came through loud and clear from the students, was that the role of the teacher was amplified, and that the students themselves, they wanted to choose and use technology to solve problems, to create and be creative, and to engage in work with meaning. And this will come through over and over again. It's interesting to reflect upon what those students said 2 years before this big push towards remote learning. And over to next to the class of 2030, released this year was the Staff of 2030 and Future Ready Teaching. So what is it that pre-service and early career teachers think and feel about their chosen profession? How do they see the role of technology? What are the challenges they perceive? And also, what are the challenges that they experience? Really important reading when we know that by 2030, 69 million additional teachers are required worldwide. And we also know that by the end of their second year of practice, 40% of early career teachers are thinking of leaving, and 10% have already made that decision. So there indeed sort of sits a supply and demand challenge for the teaching workforce. Another interesting point that's in the Staff of 2030, just to highlight for you, is just to do with this generational shift. About 70% of the current workforce is made up of the 2 youngest generations, Generation Z and Generation Y. And when we think about schools, there's a couple of interesting points. One is we're going to have up to 5 generations represented in one institution. And 2, Generation Z are still in your classroom. They're also in teacher colleges, and they're also now in your staff room as early career teachers. So Generation Z, what they think and feel is the same from the student through to the early career teacher. And one of those things is that they all say very clearly that they want to engage in work that has purpose and meaning. For them, learning must matter. So let's dig into this new paper on the Education Reimagined, and think about that in the context of what you're doing right now, how your schools and systems are navigating this this tectonic shift. The paper identifies these 3 phases, which I think we could all relate to. The first phase, when COVID happened, was this kind of disruption. There was this uncertainty. There was a sort of a sharp reaction and a quick response, around communications and content and connectivity. This was the disruption phase. Then we moved into a kind of a transitional phase where we're in the groove of delivering remote learning. We're also simultaneously planning for some form of reopening, whether it's staggered, whether it's young kids first, whether it's alternate days, whether it's modified schedules. There's a whole range of models, but this is a transitional phase that many of us are in. And then importantly, we must have this third phase of reimagining, where we start to consider how we strategically bring the best of traditional in-classroom, online, offline learning, the best of remote learning, and then we cast it forwards to a new model, a mix, a hybrid. So in terms of navigating navigating this, one of the ways that it's useful to look at that is, even within that disruption zone, there's opportunity for growth, right? So even in that first phase, which many of you might still be in, what's important is to be strategically moving along, because we can't just operate in a response and a reaction. We need to be shifting from the unsettled into a learning zone where we start to ask ourselves key questions. How do I balance screen and non-screen experiences? Or at a system level, how do we support parents to support students? Through to ultimately this growth zone, how do we ensure well-being at a system level? Who is learning? Who is struggling? How do we ensure students can develop the skills that they need? In that transition phase, that middle spot where many of us are, from our research, there seems to be sort of 4 key considerations around planning for reopening, and we're going to dig into those. But well-being, all the time in every conversation, comes up. Reflection, so strategic listening and reviewing and planning. Safety and operations, and we've got to keep bringing learning back onto the agenda, and quality learning. On the well-being piece, we know, when you hear from experts, not me, emotion is the gatekeeper to cognition, motivation, and attention. And that, our classroom environment must focus on well-being and belonging for all. It's job number 1 for teachers in planning a return, and for leaders in planning for their staff. We need to be cognizant that this is a backdrop that's not business as usual. Food security issues, grief, trauma, loss, unemployment, homelessness, economic strain, forced mobility. This is the backdrop within which our learners are moving forwards. And if emotion is the gatekeeper, then well-being must be our number 1 to provide that psychological, secure and safe environment. There's strands of DNA. If you want academic achievement, if you want well-rounded, active, informed, confident young people, then well-being must be woven into each and every action. So, if you're interested in some quick and easy strategies of what to do Monday, not someday, around social and emotional learning, I've gathered my top 10, CEL top 10, and you can grab these slides afterwards, of course. Join the community that talks about CEL in education. A couple of quick tips that I love and use all of the time. Starting each day with a mood check-in is very easy. There's a template you can download here. It's important because it makes the environment invitational, and it recognizes that all emotions matter and serve a purpose. You'll hear from some of these guys later on in Connect Ed, Alberto and Mario. They use OneNote to use as a reflection, but also as a way of building emotional granularity. I love this activity, an emotion wheel that has simple emotional language, and then it becomes increasingly granular as you move out. You can do a ton of activities with emoticons over to the left. You could use this emotion wheel and have the students map and drop emoticons to them, or in a piece of text or story writing, swap out feeling words for emoticons using the wheel almost like a key. In Teams, we have praise already built in, plus we also have emoticons that can be used. You can download an emoticon keyboard for PowerPoint, for Word. Lots of options to bring the language of emotions, both visual and also text-based, into learning. And I love Mindful Night, and there's a range of social and emotional learning resources and research tucked away in Minecraft land, and there's a link on the screen. And another final quick activity on that is Every opportunity is an opportunity to develop emotional granularity, the nuanced language to express emotion. So here's an example of 13 questions to ask for parents to ask instead of how was school today. But what's interesting is that, the teacher has cleverly embedded within there key emotion terms, right? So it looks like just a resource, but tucked away in there, it encourages you to become an emotion detective. There's a bunch of words in there that are about emotions, which is neat. Stage 2. So stage 1, well-being. Stage 2 is reflection. So this is the important part where one way we can help is to take this intentionally appreciative lens as we start to ask questions, to look at how well we did and what did we learn. It's easy to problematize in education. It's easy to look in this backdrop against what has been lost and what has been damaged. And appreciative inquiry doesn't ignore that, but it doesn't seek to problematize it. So a reflection process like this that uses a lens of equity, well-being, and quality learning can be really powerful for leadership teams to navigate positively and purposefully towards their reopening phase. We know that safety and operations are critical. There are things that just have to happen. And in the paper, the New Pedagogies team have built out a comprehensive operational consideration for leaders. There's 5 pages of that, which will help everybody to navigate safe openings, equitable openings, and openings focused on quality learning and well-being. One thing that it's easy to forget, which is kind of concerning, isn't it, is leading this quality learning agenda. This is a bunch of kind of insights from the Education Endowment Fund in the UK, and they undertook a quick snapshot research piece around remote learning and published these key findings, which you can see there. And they're interesting just to reflect upon, are we doing this? Do we need to do more of this? Peer interaction, it provides motivation and improved learning outcomes. Are your students interacting enough with one another? Independent learning improves outcomes. Are they being skilled up to do that? Choice, voice, agency. This gives purpose, passion, and meaning to learning. Do we have enough of this? And of course, technology is key there. And there's a ton of tips. So I'm happy to share the research around, they suggest kids need to get into the habit of participating before they have to do it for, a grade or a purpose. So practicing participating, connecting old with the new content, using what psychologists call the spacing effect to space out content and important information and loop back, and ensure that planning for learning in hybrid, online, remote learning situations, make sure they're using retrieval practice all of the time in different ways to ensure that knowledge is being constantly built upon and those pathways are being reinforced, and balancing asynchronous and synchronous learning within there using those strategies. Learning needs to be invitational, not just instructional in this new environment. So, a couple of quick examples. I think, maybe Chris, it's funny, I missed being a teacher yesterday, so I let my coffee go cold. I didn't pee for 7 hours and stood in my living room repeating myself, So Chris is in one sort of paradigm. Over to this other side, President Pat, one of his students was busy cooking while they were on their video call at the end of the day doing their class check-in. So the kid's busy, right? So what President Pat does is, instead of admonishing him, he gives him the option to create his own cooking show and write the recipe instead of the English as a language assignment. In a sense, President Pat was being invitational. He was inviting learning, not just focusing on instructional. Another example I heard was, the maths teacher who, after delivering an online lesson on how we measure volume of 3D spaces, then said to the students, "Great, set your timers. okay, for 30 minutes. I want you to go off now into your house, into your space, into your apartment, where you are. I want you to see whether you can find three-dimensional objects, cupboards, cabinets, boxes, and I want you to compare their volume using what you've learned, and let's report back in 30 minutes time. Now that's invitational learning, not just instructional learning. You know, the teacher who is teaching environmental science and encourages the students to create a bug hotel and to report back on that is inviting intrigue. It's inviting curiosity. You know, without intrigue, a lesson plan is just a lesson plan. You know, with intrigue, it becomes self-directed learning. So some of the emerging discoveries, and then we're just about at time, I think, coming through, which are available in the paper. Students who thrived demonstrated these competencies. So now we're getting to the skill bit. Critical thinking, creativity, self-regulation, independence, this cognitive flexibility, able to deal with change, ambiguity, complexity, perseverance, and resilience. Here's what's interesting. McKinsey and Company this year released the new Future Ready Skills document, and they called out that the new Future Ready skills, you know, involve higher order cognitive skills, social and emotional skills, and specific technological skills. And it's the intersection between these skills which create the new Future Ready skills and makes you indispensable in work and life. In the past, when we've thought about future-ready skills, we've thought really much about the technical skills for the digital economy. But what we're hearing now is that it's the mix of the cognitive, social and emotional, and technological, which will be most in demand now and into the future. But there are some missing skills identified. You can see that problem solving, critical thinking, innovation and creativity, the ability to deal with complexity and ambiguity. So that sounds familiar, right? Here's what our findings from the paper indicated were enabling some students to be successful in this shift from traditional to remote, now to hybrid. And where I've ticked off in green, there's a direct match with what employers are seeking as the new future ready skills. And in orange, well, it's assumed that they must be in place in order for people to function. So to be able to deal with change, ambiguity and complexity, you must be able to work independently and to regulate yourself, similarly, you must be able to persevere. So, we're presented with at the moment, a moment in time, if we reflect back thoughtfully and use some of the tools that are in the new paper to get value and get insights from what's happened and cast those forwards and ask ourselves, what are the critical skills that young people need, not just to get a job, keep a job or change a job, but maybe to create a job, to drive demand, and also to contribute positively and purposefully, both to the economy, but also to society. So I'm wrapping up now. Not bad for time. I don't know whether you know about Kinsakuru pottery. It's a technique used to repair, Japanese, a technique used to repair broken pottery, normally with gold solder. So the damage actually becomes an asset. The object becomes more beautiful. It becomes stronger because of its uniqueness, because of the damage that it's experienced. So, one of the things that, one of the quotes that I always loved, I'll just leave this on the screen while I'm talking. This is one of the quotes that really guided me, as a beginning teacher. And it reminded me that when we teach with who we are. And what we need to be teaching at the moment is with hope. So we need to be adopting intentionally positive mindsets, beginners' mindsets. We need to be, as leaders, taking appreciative lenses, looking back, not problematizing, not ignoring the multiple challenges facing us, but positioning as a teacher for our students, as a leader for our staff, that hope is always there, that we're moving towards not probable futures, but preferred futures. And these are futures that each and every one of us can shape each and every day by what we do, what we say, and how we care for one another. You know, this is not a return to a new normal. This is an opportunity for education reimagined. So a couple of resources and then a last bit of advice. Let me just drag that beautiful picture-in-picture up here. So some resources for you tied to some of the research papers. There's a brand new MEC course for leaders, aspiring leaders and leadership teams to take, Leading Schools 2030 course. You'll love it. And let me just finish up on this slide. Here's my last bit of advice, and then I'll go away and you can enjoy the rest of Connect Ed. It's been great spending time with you, and thank you so much for the opportunity. It would be this: go easy on yourself. You know, whatever you've done today, whatever you've done this week, let it be enough. Practice that self-compassion. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that there's been something in the presentation that's of interest and of use for you as you navigate this next phase. Thanks again. Goodbye.